I sit at the far end of the long walnut table in my parents' dining room. The air is thick with perfume, judgment, and cold turkey. My sister Winona lifts her wineglass mid-toast and says with that sugar-sweet venom, "To those of us who actually have careers." Everyone laughs, even Uncle Dwayne, even Mom. Then my phone buzzes. The room falls silent. I answer, "Yes, sir?" The voice on the other end booms over speaker. "Is this Clara Evison, founder of Arion Labs? I need a personal consult. Your patents just shook the market." Every face freezes, jaws drop. Winona's glass slips from her hand. I was the useless daughter, the quiet one with no job and no prospects, a perpetual disappointment in a family that worshipped success. They were the golden ones with their high-powered jobs, their perfect families, and their seats at the head of the table. But the truth was a secret I had guarded for 2 years, a seed of an idea I had nurtured in silence and obscurity. That billion-dollar biotech company they all read about in the financial pages, the one they worshipped as the pinnacle of modern innovation. It was mine. They never imagined, not for a second, that I could be the one to build it. From being mocked and kicked out of my family's Christmas dinner for being jobless, to secretly building a biotech empire that would leave them all in stunned silence, I'm about to tell you exactly how I did it. It was Christmas Eve, a night that was supposed to be about warmth and togetherness. But in the Eveson household, it was always a tribunal. The annual family meeting, a tradition started by my father, was a formal affair where we were expected to present our year's accomplishments like soldiers reporting to a commanding officer. The long, polished walnut table was a battlefield, and the main course was always a side of judgment, served cold. I sat at the far end, the seat reserved for guests or, in my case, disappointments. The scent of my mother's expensive perfume mingled with the heavy aroma of pine from the ridiculously large tree in the corner, and it was suffocating. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the one that always appeared the moment I stepped over their threshold. I was broke, not just a little short on cash, but profoundly, terrifyingly broke. 2 weeks earlier, I'd been fired from a low-paying lab internship. The official reason was budget cuts, but the unofficial reason, which my supervisor had delivered with a pitying look, was that I wasn't aggressive enough. I was too quiet, too methodical. In the cutthroat world of corporate science, that was a death sentence. So now I was 25, with a prestigious science degree that was gathering dust, a pile of unpaid bills, and a level of exhaustion that felt bone deep. I'd tried to hide it, putting on my one good dress and a careful layer of makeup, but my mother Mira had seen right through it. "You look tired, Clara," she'd said, her voice clipped with disapproval, as if my exhaustion were a personal insult to her. Winona, my older sister, was holding court. As the vice president of marketing at a flashy tech firm, she was the family's crown jewel. She flicked her perfect blonde hair over her shoulder and raised her wine glass. "A toast," she'd announced, her eyes sweeping the table before landing, inevitably on me. "To a successful year. And to those of us who are contributing members of society." She'd smiled, a razor-thin expression that didn't reach her cold eyes. Some of us pull more weight than others, after all. The jab was so obvious it was almost clumsy, but it hit its mark. My father, Vance, a retired military man who valued strength and reputation above all else, gave a short, sharp nod of agreement. Laughter trickled around the table. Even my Uncle Dwayne, who usually tried to stay neutral, let out a chuckle. The sound was like stones rattling in a tin can. I looked at my mother, hoping for a flicker of defense, but she just stared down at her plate, her lips a tight, thin line. Her silence was always the deepest cut. The conversation, as it always did, turned to business. Family trusts, investments, inheritance. It was a language I was never fluent in. My father cleared his throat, the sound commanding immediate silence. "Now, regarding the quarterly distribution from the family trust," he began, his eyes scanning a document in front of him. "We need to vote on the allocation for the upcoming year." My heart pounded. This was it. This was the part I dreaded most. "Given the current circumstances," he continued, his gaze finally falling on me, cold and hard as granite, "we need to formalize the family business affairs." I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. I knew what was coming. I had to say something. Anything. I opened my mouth, my voice barely a whisper. I'd like to say something. My father cut me off before I could finish the sentence. His voice was not loud, but it had the flat, final authority of a gavel. You don't get a vote, Clara. He didn't look away. You don't get a say. You don't even have a job. The words hung in the air, brutal and absolute. Humiliation washed over me, hot and sickening. I felt every eye on me, a mixture of pity and contempt. Winona smirked into her wineglass. It's a simple matter of practicality, she added, her voice dripping with false sympathy. The trust is for the benefit of those who are actively building the family's legacy. It's not a charity. My father nodded. Winona is correct. All in favor of formally removing Clara from all business affairs and inheritance considerations until she can demonstrate a stable and respectable career path. Hands went up around the table. Winona's was first, sharp and decisive. My father's, my uncle's, Jonas, Winona's spineless husband, raised his hand slowly, avoiding my eyes. My mother. My mother did nothing. She just sat there, frozen, her inaction a vote in itself. The motion passed. I was officially an outcast. The room was silent for a moment, the air thick with my shame. Then, my mother leaned towards me, her voice a low, urgent whisper that was meant only for me but felt like a shout. Clara, please, just go, you're spoiling the mood for everyone. Her words broke something inside me. It wasn't the vote, or my father's cruelty, or Winona's venom. It was my mother, prioritizing the mood of a Christmas dinner over her own daughter. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. My legs were shaking so badly I was afraid I would fall. I didn't say a word. I turned and walked out of the dining room, down the long hallway, past the smiling family photos that felt like a mockery. I grabbed my thin coat, pulled open the heavy front door, and stepped out into the biting cold. The snow was falling in thick, silent flakes, and the world was instantly muffled. I stood there on the porch, shaking from the cold and the humiliation, the sound of their distant laughter a final cruel twist of the knife. I was alone. The engine of my beat-up sedan had long gone cold. I was parked at the edge of a deserted lookout point, the one teenagers used in the summer. Tonight, it was just me and the swirling snow. I couldn't go to a friend's house. What would I say? My family just voted me out of the will on Christmas Eve because I'm unemployed. Can I sleep on your couch? The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I leaned my forehead against the freezing glass of the driver's side window, watching my breath fog up the pain. The city lights below were blurred, distant constellations of a life I wasn't part of. I had $4.67 in my bank account. My rent was a week overdue. My car, this rusted metal shell that was now my only refuge, was running on fumes. My mind started replaying a highlight reel of my failures, a relentless slideshow of humiliation. The crisp, impersonal rejection letters from a dozen biotech firms. While your qualifications are impressive, we've decided to move forward with other candidates. The condescending smile of an HR manager during a failed interview. We're really looking for a go-getter, someone with more spark. I could still feel the phantom weight of those letters in my hands, the cheap paper a testament to my inadequacy. I saw the flash of red on the envelopes piled on my small kitchen counter. Final notice, overdue. It wasn't just that I was jobless, I felt fundamentally useless. My family's verdict tonight wasn't a surprise. It was a confirmation of my deepest fear, that I was and always would be a failure. A sob finally broke through the numbness, a ragged, ugly sound in the crushing silence of the car. The tears came, hot and fast, freezing almost instantly on my cheeks. But I wasn't just crying because they had kicked me out. I was crying because a small, stupid, stubborn part of me, a part I thought I had killed off years ago, still desperately wanted their approval. I wanted my father to look at me with pride, just once. I wanted my mother to defend me. I wanted my sister to see me as an equal, not a punching bag. The pain of that unrequited hope was sharper than any insult. It was the hope that was killing me. I cried until my throat was raw and my body ached, purging the last dregs of that childish need. As the tears subsided, leaving behind a hollow emptiness, a memory surfaced, unbidden. It was from a guest lecture in my final year of university. A man named Dawson Flint, a former CEO who had built a pharmaceutical giant from the ground up before being spectacularly betrayed by his board and losing everything. He was grizzled, intense, and had spoken with a brutal honesty that had electrified the lecture hall. He'd talked about the loneliness of innovation, the necessity of failure. After the lecture, I'd stayed behind to ask him a question about his early research. He had looked at me, really looked at me, his gaze sharp and assessing. "You don't think like the others," he'd said, his voice a low rumble. "You see the gaps, the spaces in between. That's rare. Don't let them beat it out of you." At the time, I'd dismissed it as a throwaway compliment. But now, sitting in the frozen darkness of my car, his words came back to me. "Don't let them beat it out of you." They had beaten it out of me until there was almost nothing left. But maybe not nothing. A spark of something new ignited in the cold ashes of my despair. It wasn't hope. It was something harder, colder. It was spite. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy with cold. The screen was painfully bright. I opened my old university email account, my heart pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. I searched his name, and there it was, an old email chain from 5 years ago. I stared at the compose button, my thumb hovering over the screen. What was I doing? This was insane. He wouldn't remember me. He wouldn't care. But what did I have to lose? I had already lost everything that was supposed to matter. My family, my dignity, my future. I started typing, the words coming out stark and raw, stripped of all pleasantries. It was a Hail Mary, a message in a bottle thrown into a vast and different ocean. To Dawson Flint. Subject: a question. The cursor blinked. My breath hitched. I wrote one single desperate line. "You once told me I had potential. I need to know if you meant it." My fingers shook as I hit send. The email disappeared into the ether. I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat and leaned my head back, a strange, terrifying calm settling over me. I had nothing left but the echo of a stranger's belief and a full tank of spite. That night, I slept in my car, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I was done running. He replied in less than an hour. The notification lit up my phone screen with a single stark word: tomorrow. Below it was a time and the address of a diner on the industrial outskirts of the city. No greeting, no pleasantries, just a command. The next morning, I used the last of my change to buy a coffee from a gas station, washing my face in the grimy bathroom, trying to make myself look like someone who had not just spent the night sleeping in her car. The diner was exactly what you'd expect. Cracked red vinyl booths, the lingering smell of stale coffee and fried bacon, a waitress who looked as tired as I felt. Dawson Flint was already there, sitting in a booth in the back corner, nursing a black coffee. He looked older than I remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper, his hair more silver than gray. He didn't stand when I approached, just gestured to the seat opposite him with a jerk of his head. "You look like hell," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. It wasn't an insult, it was a statement of fact. "So, they finally did it, didn't they? Beat it out of you." He took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes sharp and intelligent, boring into me. He hadn't asked what they did. He already knew. He'd seen it in 1,000 other bright young minds chewed up by corporate or familial machinery. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I had expected to have to explain, to plead my case, but he seemed to see the whole sordid story etched on my face. He didn't offer a word of sympathy. There was no "I'm sorry to hear that," or "that must have been so difficult." There was only a blunt, searing honesty that was more bracing than any comforting lie. "Good," he said, setting his mug down with a decisive clink. "Approval is a drug. The withdrawal is brutal, but you'll be stronger without it. Now what do you want from me?" I faltered, the question catching me off guard. "I don't know. You said I had potential. The words sounded weak, pathetic, even to my own ears. He leaned forward, his expression intense. Potential is worthless without action. It's a seed that most people let rot in their pocket. I see what they don't see in you. I see a mind that connects things others miss. But I'm not a charity, Clara. I don't do handouts, and I don't do therapy. I lost my empire because I trusted the wrong people. I will never make that mistake again. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. So here's the deal. I don't mentor for free. I don't give pep talks, but I will guide you. I will teach you everything I know about building something from nothing, about navigating the sharks, about turning an idea into an asset. In return, you give me 10% equity in whatever you build. Non-negotiable. 10%. It was a staggering amount to give away of a company that didn't even exist. A company that was currently just a desperate idea in the head of a woman who had less than $5 to her name. But he wasn't offering me money. He was offering me a roadmap. He was offering me the one thing I needed more than anything. A chance. Okay, I said, my voice clear and steady for the first time in months. There was no hesitation. I agree. A flicker of something, surprise, respect, passed through his eyes. He nodded slowly. All right then, we start now. He paid for the coffees and we left. He led me not to some gleaming office building, but to an old abandoned woodworking shop on the edge of town that belonged to a friend of his. The air inside was cold and smelled of sawdust, engine oil, and decay. A thick layer of dust covered everything. Light struggled to pierce the grimy windows. This is your new headquarters, he announced, gesturing to the cavernous, empty space. It's all you've got. It's all you need. For the rest of the day, we didn't talk about my family or my feelings. We worked. We cleared a space on an old workbench, wiping away years of grime. He pulled out a large roll of paper and a pen. What's the one market nobody is serving properly, but everyone needs? He asked, his eyes alight with a fire I hadn't seen before. We talked for hours. I told him about my half-formed ideas, the ones I'd scribbled in notebooks late at night. My research had kept circling back to one area, fertility. It was a field filled with desperation, astronomical costs, and surprisingly outdated technology. It was a niche with an explosive, deeply personal need, a market that my own family, with my aunt's painful and unsuccessful treatments, knew all too well. Dawson listened, interjecting with sharp questions, challenging my assumptions. By the time the sun began to set, casting long dusty shadows across the concrete floor, we had a plan, a product roadmap for a low-cost, high-accuracy home fertility diagnostic tool. It was audacious, impossible, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't despair. It was purpose. The next few months were a blur of caffeine and code, a brutal education in survival. My life shrank to the four walls of the dusty workshop and the glowing screen of my second-hand laptop. I lived off instant oatmeal, the lumpy, bland texture a constant reminder of my financial state, and pot after pot of the cheapest, most bitter black coffee I could find. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. Dawson had given me a reading list that was a mile long, and I devoured it. I took free online courses in grant writing, my eyes burning from staring at the screen for hours, learning the specific, arcane language required to beg for money. I waded through dense articles on biotech intellectual property law, my brain aching with the effort of understanding patents and protections. I forced myself to learn the labyrinthine FDA regulations for medical devices, a world of bureaucratic doublespeak that felt designed to make you give up. Every day was a mountain to climb, and every night I collapsed onto a makeshift cot in the corner of the lab, my mind buzzing with information. Dawson was a relentless teacher. He'd show up at random times, scan my progress, and deliver critiques that were as sharp and clean as a scalpel. This grant proposal is sentimental, he'd bark, pointing at a line where I'd tried to inject some emotional appeal. They don't care about your passion. They care about market size and return on investment. Rewrite it. There was no praise, only a grudging nod when I finally got it right. It was the toughest education I'd ever received, and the most valuable. Then came the rejections. The first one felt like a physical blow. I had poured my soul into that grant application. I had followed every rule, used every buzzword, and crafted what I thought was a perfect proposal. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. "We regret to inform you." I didn't even read the rest. A wave of crushing self-doubt washed over me. I was a fraud. Dawson had been wrong. My family had been right. I sat on the cold concrete floor and stared at a wall for an hour, the silence of the workshop amplifying my failure. The second rejection came 3 weeks later. It stung, but less. The shock was gone, replaced by a dull, familiar ache of disappointment. I allowed myself 10 minutes of frustration. Then I got up, made another pot of bitter coffee, and started working on the next application. I was building a callus on my soul. The third one was different. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. It was a maybe. They wanted more data, a more detailed prototype plan. It was a sliver of light under a door that had been bolted shut. For 2 weeks, I worked with a frantic, desperate energy, compiling every scrap of research, building financial models that were more hope than reality, and refining the technical specifications until my eyes crossed. I sent it off, my heart a tight knot of anxiety. And then, one night, it happened. It was almost 3 in the morning. I was hunched over my laptop, trying to debug a line of code, my body screaming for sleep. An email notification popped up. The subject line was simple: "Regarding your R&D funding application." My hand was shaking as I clicked it open. I scanned the dense text, my eyes searching for the familiar "We regret to inform you." But they weren't there. Instead, I saw a sentence that made the world stop. "We are pleased to inform you that your proposal has been approved for a seed grant of $50,000. $50,000. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was everything. It was real. I read the email 3 times, convinced it was a mistake, but it was real. I pushed back from the workbench, a laugh bubbling up from my chest, a sound so unfamiliar it startled me. I was alone in the vast, dark workshop, surrounded by dust and discarded tools, and I started to dance. It wasn't a graceful or pretty dance. It was a wild, joyful, clumsy explosion of movement. I spun around on the cold concrete floor, my arms flung wide, laughing and crying at the same time. A single bare bulb, hanging from the ceiling, swung back and forth, casting my dancing shadow against the wall. A lone figure, celebrating a tiny, hard-won victory in the dark. It was the first microdose of hope, and it was intoxicating. The $50,000 felt like a fortune, but it disappeared with terrifying speed. We bought used lab equipment, specialized reagents, and processing chips. Suddenly, the abstract lines of code and theoretical designs on my laptop had to become a physical object, and that object refused to work. Our prototype was a small, delicate assembly of wires, sensors, and a custom microfluidic chip. The first time I ran a test sample, the output was gibberish. The second time, it short-circuited with a sad little puff of smoke. The third, fourth, and 10th times were no better. The failures started to stack up, each one a small, demoralizing defeat. The workshop, once a place of hopeful creation, began to feel like a graveyard of my ambitions, littered with the corpses of burnt-out circuit boards and useless plastic casings. Duct tape and sheer will were holding the project together, and both were starting to fray. My optimism corroded into a constant low-grade anxiety. I wasn't sleeping. I'd lie on my cot, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every failed test, every line of flawed code. The pressure was immense. Dawson felt it too. His critiques, once sharp and constructive, became edged with a harsh, brittle frustration. He saw the grant money dwindling, the timeline stretching, and his patience wore thin. The explosion came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I'd been working for 36 hours straight on a new version of the sensor array, and it had just failed again, spitting out a stream of nonsensical data. I slumped over the workbench, my head in my hands, fighting back tears of sheer exhaustion and frustration. "What's the matter with you?" Dawson's voice cut through the quiet hum of the equipment. I looked up. He was standing by the door, his arms crossed, his face a mask of thunderous disapproval. "This is what I'm talking about. You're getting emotional. The data is just data. It's not a personal attack. Your sentimentality is clouding your judgment." His words hit a raw nerve. All the exhaustion, all the fear, all the pressure of the last few months erupted in a blaze of anger. I shot up from my stool. "Emotional?" I fired back, my voice shaking with a fury that surprised me. "I'm emotional because I actually care if this works. I'm not just looking at spreadsheets and burn rates. And don't you dare talk to me about clouded judgment. You're so terrified of feeling anything, of failing again, that you're thinking like a man who's already given up." The moment the words left my mouth, I wished I could take them back. The barb had hit its mark. A flicker of deep old pain crossed his face before being replaced by a cold, hard fury. "I gave up," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I poured 20 years of my life into a company that was stolen from me by people I trusted. You know nothing about what I've given up. And you know nothing about what it's like to have your own family treat you like you're worthless," I retorted, the argument spiraling out of control. "Maybe if you still had a heart you'd understand that this isn't just a product for me." It was a brutal, ugly fight, fueled by stress and fear. The air in the workshop crackled with tension. Finally he just shook his head, a look of profound disappointment in his eyes. "I can't work like this," he said, and walked out, slamming the heavy door behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. It was over. I had failed. I had driven away the one person who believed in me. I sank back onto the stool, the anger draining away, leaving a vast hollow emptiness. I was done. I couldn't do this anymore. I packed my few belongings into a worn backpack, my movements slow and robotic. I was ready to walk away from the whole mess, from the failed prototypes and the ghost of Dawson's anger. As I zipped up the bag, my gaze fell on my laptop, still open on the workbench. On the screen was a browser tab I'd left open for days, a video I'd watched for inspiration. It was an online forum for women struggling with infertility. One woman, her face pale and her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, was speaking directly to the camera. "We do everything they tell us," she said, her voice cracking. "The shots, the schedules, the emotional roller coaster, and the technology just isn't good enough. It feels like we're just guessing. I would give anything for something that gave me real, clear answers." I watched her, and the fight with Dawson, the burnt-out circuits, the dwindling bank account, it all faded away. I saw my aunt's face after her third failed IVF cycle, the brave smile that didn't hide the devastation in her eyes. This wasn't about me. It wasn't about proving my family wrong or making Dawson proud. It was about that woman on the screen. It was for every person who felt like their body had betrayed them. The anger and despair were replaced by a sudden fierce clarity. I unzipped my backpack and took my things out. I sat back down at the workbench. I opened my notebooks, and with the woman's voice still echoing in my head, I started to write. I didn't just tweak the algorithm, I threw it out entirely. I started from scratch, from a completely new premise, one that wasn't just about data points, but about predicting patterns. I worked through the night, fueled by a purpose so clear and strong it felt like a physical force. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the grimy workshop windows, I finished. I had it. It was radical, untested, and it was the best work I had ever done. The breakthrough was real. The new algorithm worked. Not just in theory, but in practice. Our prototype, once a source of constant frustration, began to produce consistent, accurate, and astonishingly nuanced results. We were onto something revolutionary, and the data proved it. But we were also nearly broke again. The last of the grant money was gone, spent on the final push to get the prototype working. We were running on fumes, and Dawson's face was etched with a familiar grim anxiety. That's when the email arrived. It was from a venture capital firm I'd never heard of, an outfit with a flashy name and a slick website. They wanted a meeting. Immediately. Their lead investor, a man named Marcus Thorne, oozed a predatory charm. He strode into our dusty workshop in a suit that cost more than my car, his polished Italian shoes looking comically out of place on the oil-stained concrete. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He'd heard whispers about our work through the grapevine, and he wanted in. He let us do our presentation, listening with an unnerving stillness. When I finished, he leaned back, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. "Very impressive, Dr. Evison," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Truly, you have something special here." Then he made his offer. "I'm prepared to offer you $500,000, seed funding, effective immediately." I felt the air leave my lungs. $500,000. It was a lifeline. It was a validation. It was everything we needed. I looked at Dawson, whose expression was unreadable. But then came the catch. "My terms are simple," Marcus continued, pulling a leather-bound folder from his briefcase. "We take a 60% controlling interest in the company." I flinched. 60%. We would lose control before we even started. "And," he added, his smile tightening slightly, "we fast-track to market. We bypass extensive patient trials. They're expensive, time-consuming, and all they do is create legal red tape. We have a product that works. We need to move now, capture the market before a competitor does." I stared at him, a cold dread seeping into my veins. No patient trials. He wanted to release a medical diagnostic tool, a tool that people would use to make profound, life-altering decisions without rigorous ethical testing. The temptation was a physical thing. I could almost taste it. $500,000. It meant a real lab, not this dusty workshop. It meant salaries, better equipment, an end to the constant gnawing fear of financial ruin. It meant we could survive. I thought about the endless nights, the oatmeal, the rejections. I thought about the fight with Dawson, the desperation. The money was a quick fix, a golden ticket out of the struggle. Dawson remained silent beside me, his face a stony mask. He was leaving this entirely up to me. As Marcus droned on about market share and quarterly returns, my mind drifted away from his slick pitch. I saw my Aunt Carol's face. I remembered sitting with her in her kitchen after her second miscarriage following a round of IVF. She had been using an early-generation ovulation predictor, a device that had been rushed to market with minimal testing. It had given her a false sense of confidence, a hope that had been cruelly snatched away. I remembered her quiet, heartbroken words. "I just wish I could have trusted the science, Clara. I wish I knew for sure." I looked at Marcus Thorne, with his expensive suit and his talk of bypassing red tape, and I saw the face of the kind of man who would sell my aunt that false hope for a profit. And in that moment, the decision became startlingly simple. The temptation vanished, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it cut through the air like a blade. Marcus stopped mid-sentence, his smile faltering. "I'm sorry?" he asked as if he'd misheard. "The answer is no," I repeated, my voice stronger now. "We won't be taking your offer. We're not skipping any trials. We're going to do this the right way, or we're not going to do it at all." Marcus stared at me for a long moment, his charm evaporating to reveal something cold and reptilian underneath. He slowly packed his briefcase, a sneer twisting his lips. "You're lost, doctor," he said, and walked out without a backward glance. The silence he left behind was heavy. I didn't dare look at Dawson. I had just turned down $500,000. I had just condemned us to more struggle, more uncertainty. I felt like I was going to be sick. Then, Dawson finally spoke. He hadn't moved, hadn't said a word during the entire meeting. I turned to look at him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't disappointed. He was looking at me with a quiet, profound respect I had never seen in his eyes before. He gave a single, slow nod. "That," he said, his voice a low rumble of approval, "was your first CEO decision. We did it the right way. It took 6 more months of agonizingly slow progress, of scraping by on smaller, more ethical bridge loans from a medical research foundation Dawson had a connection with. We ran patient trials, meticulously gathering data, refining the prototype with every new piece of information. The results were even better than we'd hoped. Our device wasn't just accurate, it was predictive. It could identify the optimal fertility window, with a 99.4% success rate, a number that was unheard of in the industry. And then everything changed. A mid-sized medical device company, a reputable firm known for innovation, got wind of our trial results. They approached us not with a predatory offer, but with a partnership. They wanted to license our technology. The final number on the contract made my hands shake. $1.2 million. The money hit our new modest business account on a Friday. I stared at the number on the screen, at all those zeros, and I felt a wave of dizziness. We weren't just surviving anymore, we were succeeding. That night, Dawson and I didn't go to a fancy restaurant. We ordered a pizza to the workshop and drank a cheap bottle of champagne out of coffee mugs. It was a quiet, almost surreal celebration. For the first time, I felt the weight of the past year lift. I had done it. I had proven them all wrong. The feeling was a potent cocktail of relief, pride, and a quiet, profound vindication. The high lasted for exactly 3 days. On Monday morning, I was doing a routine search of new patent filings, a habit Dawson had drilled into me. And then I saw it. A patent application filed by a major tech firm, Winona's firm. The title of the patent was for a predictive fertility analysis system. My blood ran cold. I opened the document, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was my work. It was a watered-down, clumsily articulated version of my algorithm, but it was undeniably mine. The core concepts, the unique approach to data analysis, it was all there, twisted into corporate jargon. The lead inventor listed on the application was Winona Evison. I felt a surge of disbelief, followed by a hot, white-hot rage. How? How could she have possibly known? And then the memory hit me, so sharp and clear it felt like a physical blow. My old notebooks, the ones filled with my earliest, most chaotic brainstorming, I'd left them in my childhood bedroom when I'd been kicked out, stuffed in a box in the back of the closet. I had never gone back for them. She must have found them. She must have gone through my things, stolen my most private thoughts, my intellectual property, and passed it off as her own. The sheer audacity, the cold-blooded treachery of it, left me breathless. But she couldn't have understood the science well enough to turn my notes into a patent application. She was in marketing. She wouldn't know where to begin. She needed help. And I knew, with a sickening certainty, who had helped her. Jonas, her husband, my brother-in-law. Jonas, who worked in product development at the same company. Jonas, who had always been kind to me in a weak, pitying sort of way. Jonas, who had sat at that Christmas Eve dinner and raised his hand to cast me out. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying logic. He must have been the one to recognize the value in my scribbles, to translate my raw science into a corporate asset for his wife. It was a betrayal, so deep, so personal, it eclipsed everything else they had ever done to me. This wasn't just kicking me when I was down, this was robbing my grave. I called our lawyer immediately, my voice tight with a controlled fury. He was calm, professional. "We'll file a cease and desist," he said. "We have your lab notes, your prototype data, the trial results. Your claim is ironclad. They won't have a leg to stand on." The letter was sent that afternoon. I imagined it landing on Winona's desk, a formal declaration of war. I expected a panicked call, a denial, something. Instead, I got something far worse, silence. Then, a few days later, a mutual acquaintance mentioned she'd had dinner with Winona and Jonas. "They got some legal letter," the acquaintance said with a laugh. Winona thought it was hilarious. She said her crazy, jobless little sister was having some kind of breakdown and making wild accusations. They were laughing about it. They were laughing. They had stolen my life's work, and they were laughing it off as a joke. They didn't see me as a threat. They saw me as the same pathetic, quiet girl they had cast out into the snow. In their minds I was nothing, and so my claims were nothing. That was their mistake. The hurt from their betrayal curdled into something else, something cold and hard and dangerous. It was no longer about vindication, it was about annihilation. They thought they had buried me. They had no idea they had just planted a seed. The laughter was the final catalyst. It burned away the last vestige of hurt and left behind a cold, clear, diamond-hard resolve. They didn't see me as a threat. Good. I would build an empire in the shadows they had cast me into. The first call I made was to my lawyer. "I want to form a new corporation. I said, my voice devoid of emotion. A shell corporation. Something completely untraceable back to me, or our current company. I want a new identity, a new brand, everything. He was hesitant at first, but I was firm. This wasn't about hiding, it was about building a fortress. We created Orion Labs. The name sounded strong, timeless, and most importantly, anonymous. We used a series of legal structures to obscure the ownership, burying my name under layers of corporate veils. Dr. Clara Evison, the quiet failure, disappeared. In her place was Orion Labs, a mysterious, faceless entity. Next, I liquidated the licensing deal. It was a bold move, effectively breaking our first contract, but our agreement had a clause allowing for it if a competitor infringed on the patent. Winona's blatant theft had given me the perfect exit. With the full $1.2 million now under Orion's control, we had the capital to go it alone. We didn't need a partner, we needed silence and speed. I hired a small, fiercely loyal team. They were all remote, scattered across the globe, from a brilliant software engineer in Bangalore to a regulatory specialist in Berlin. They knew me only as the founder of Orion Labs. They didn't know my history, my family, or my pain. They were hired for their skills, not their connections. Our meetings were video calls, our headquarters a secure server. We were a ghost in the machine. With the new resources, we moved at a blistering pace. We finalized the prototype, filed a dozen new ironclad patents under the Orion name, and began the process of seeking international regulatory approval. We bypassed the US market entirely for the time being. It was too close to home, too close to Winona. Instead, we targeted Europe and Asia, where the demand was high, and where my family's name meant nothing. It worked. The international medical community wasn't interested in family drama, they were interested in results, and our results were undeniable. The first orders started trickling in, then flooding in. Within 6 months, Orion Labs was profitable. Within 9, it was a recognized name in the global biotech community. One evening, Dawson came to the workshop. He'd been watching my whirlwind of activity from a distance, offering advice only when asked. The workshop was mostly empty now, the equipment having been moved to a secure professional facility. It echoed with the ghosts of our struggle. He looked around the space, a faint, sad smile on his face. "You don't need me anymore, Clara," he said quietly. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. "You've learned the lessons, you know how to fight." He walked over to me, his expression serious. "But I want to give you one last piece of advice. Never forget what made you so dangerous to them in the first place, your silence. They underestimated you because you were quiet. Now your silence is your greatest weapon. Let them wonder, let them hear the rumors of this new company, and never for a second suspect it's you. The noise will come later. For now, be the silence." I knew he was right. He was officially retiring, he said, for good this time. He was going to move to a small cabin and finally write that book he'd always talked about. Our handshake felt final, the end of an era. The next day, I booked a one-way ticket to Boston. It was time to move from the shadows into the light, but on my own terms. I used a fraction of Orion's profits to buy a small, sleek office space in the heart of the city's tech hub. From my new window, I could see the glittering towers of the financial district, a world away from the dusty workshop where I had cried over burnt-out circuits. I was Clara Evison again, but a different version. This version was the founder and CEO of a rapidly growing international biotech firm, and nobody in my old life had a clue. A full year passed, a year of relentless work, strategic growth, and absolute silence toward my family. Orion Labs was no longer a ghost, it was a juggernaut. Our technology had been featured in prestigious medical journals, and our revenue had skyrocketed. I had built a life in Boston, a world that was entirely my own, populated by brilliant colleagues and the quiet satisfaction of meaningful work. The pain of my family's betrayal had faded, replaced by the cool, detached focus of a CEO. I hadn't forgotten, but I had moved on. Then one crisp autumn afternoon, the past reached out. It arrived as an email, sitting innocuously in my inbox, between a quarterly report and a meeting request. The sender's address made my heart stop. Mira Evison. The subject line read, Family Business Planning Weekend, Invitation. My hand trembled slightly as I opened it. It was a formal, almost comically stilted invitation to the annual family gathering at their house. The same event that, a little over 2 years ago, had been the scene of my ultimate humiliation. The email spoke of reconnecting and discussing the family's future. It was signed by my father. I stared at the screen, a whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. Why now? After a year of complete, unbroken silence, why reach out? Were they apologizing? No, the tone of the email was too proud for that. Did they need something? That seemed more likely. Perhaps their own fortunes were not as golden as they once were. A part of me, a dark, cynical part, suspected Winona's stolen patent had gone nowhere, and now they were sniffing around for a new opportunity. My first instinct was to delete it, to send it to the spam folder where it belonged, and continue with my life. It was the safe choice, the logical choice. But another part of me, the part that had been forged in that cold workshop, hesitated. This wasn't just an invitation, it was an opportunity. But for what? Revenge? Closure? I wasn't sure. The conflict was a knot in my stomach. I needed perspective. I needed someone who understood the war, not just the battle. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. He answered on the second ring, his voice the same familiar, gravelly rumble. Dawson. I explained the situation, reading the email aloud to him. I laid out my confusion, my hesitation. I don't know what to do, I admitted. The uncertainty in my own voice irritating me. Should I go? What's the point? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of wind, imagining him sitting on the porch of his cabin. When he finally spoke, his words were like a splash of ice water, sharp and clarifying, cutting through all my emotional fog. That depends entirely on why you would be going, Clara, he said. Are you going to seek their love? Are you hoping for an apology? Are you looking for the family you wish you had? If the answer is yes to any of those, then burn the invitation and never look back. It's a trap, and you'll walk right into it. He paused, letting his words sink in. But, he continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, if you are going because you are ready to calmly and completely destroy their entire worldview, if you are going to show them the consequences of their actions, not to make them love you, but to make them understand, then you should go. He was right. He had sliced to the heart of it. This couldn't be an emotional pilgrimage. It had to be a strategic operation. It wasn't about seeking their love. I was long past that. It was about showing them the truth, a truth so undeniable it would shatter the false reality they had built around themselves. It was about closing the book, not by tearing out the pages, but by writing the final definitive chapter myself. Thank you, Dawson, I said, a new sense of purpose solidifying within me. The confusion was gone, replaced by a cold, quiet resolve. This was not a family reunion, it was a hostile takeover of the narrative. I hung up the phone, turned back to my computer, and with a steady hand, I clicked the link to book my flight. The moment I stepped into the house, the familiar chill of judgment settled over me. It was in the way my mother's eyes did a quick, critical scan of my simple, well-made but unflashy dress. "Oh, Clara," Mira said, her smile thin and brittle. "It's good to see you. That dress is very practical." The implication was clear. It wasn't expensive enough, not impressive enough. My father Vance shook my hand with a limp, formal grip, his eyes already looking past me toward Winona, who was descending the grand staircase like a queen. She was dressed in a sharp designer power suit, her face a mask of smug perfection. "Clara," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You came. I'm surprised you could get the time off from whatever it is you're doing these days." Jonas, her husband, hovered behind her, giving me a weak, avoidant nod. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I just smiled, a calm, pleasant, unreadable smile. "It's good to see you all too," I said, my voice even. I refused to take the bait. 2 years ago, their words would have been 1,000 tiny cuts. Now they were pebbles bouncing off armor. My calmness seemed to unnerve them more than any argument would have. They wanted the old Clara, the one who would flinch and retreat. They didn't know what to do with this version. I moved through the initial pleasantries like a diplomat in a hostile country, observing, nodding, and revealing nothing. My internal monologue, however, was running a different track. As Winona commented on my simple leather shoes, I thought about the 7-figure contract I had signed just last week. As my father made a pointed remark about the importance of a stable career, I mentally reviewed Orion's explosive quarterly growth report. It was a delicious, private irony. The main event began after dinner. We gathered in the study, the air thick with the smell of old leather and entitlement. My father stood before the fireplace, assuming his role as patriarch. "As you know," he began, "this weekend is about securing the Evison legacy." He then launched into a speech about Winona's company, which was, according to him, on the verge of a major breakthrough. Winona took her cue, stepping forward with a triumphant gleam in her eye. "As Dad said, we're at a pivotal moment," she announced, her voice resonating with rehearsed importance. "My division is about to finalize a landmark partnership with a leading biotech firm, a truly disruptive innovator in the fertility space. They're called Orion Labs." I had to physically restrain the smirk that threatened to break free. I kept my expression neutral, my gaze politely fixed on her, as she described my own company to me. She used words like game changer and market leader, completely oblivious. It was the most satisfying moment of my life, and they had no idea they were giving it to me. "This partnership," she concluded, puffing out her chest, "will secure our family's financial future for generations." A murmur of impressed approval went around the room. I felt a small, almost imperceptible vibration in my pocket. My phone. I ignored it for now. The timing wasn't right. Then, my father turned to the final piece of business. "Before we celebrate," he said, his face hardening as his eyes fell on me, "we must address the family trust. The bylaws state that stakes are determined by contribution to the family's standing and assets." He didn't need to say my name. "I see no evidence that Clara's situation has changed. Therefore, I see no reason to alter the vote from last time. I vote to continue her exclusion." Winona seconded the motion immediately, a cruel little smile playing on her lips. "It's just business, Clara. Nothing personal." The vote went around the room. One by one they voted me out. Again, the final, predictable insult. But this time, there was a tiny, significant change. When it was my mother's turn, she didn't just stay silent. She looked at me, a flicker of something unreadable, doubt, guilt, in her eyes, and she whispered, "I abstain." It wasn't support, but it was a crack in the monolith of their unified judgment. It didn't matter. The trap was now perfectly set. They had just publicly, formally, and finally declared me worthless. Just as my father said, the motion carries. My phone buzzed again, a persistent, insistent vibration. This time I didn't ignore it. The entire room was watching as I calmly pulled it from my pocket. The screen lit up with a name. I smiled. Perfect timing. I looked up at my father, who was scowling at the interruption. "Excuse me," I said, my voice clear and steady in the suddenly silent room. "I have to take this." I pressed the answer key and immediately hit the speakerphone button. The voice that boomed out, crisp and professional, was that of Marcus Thorne, not the predatory investor, but Arthur Chen, a distinguished member of my board of directors. His voice filled the study, echoing off the leather-bound books. "Dr. Evison, my apologies for calling on a weekend," the voice said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "but the board is ecstatic. The preliminary numbers from the European launch are in, and they are astronomical. Congratulations, Doctor. As the founder of Orion Labs, you have single-handedly dominated the fertility market in less than a year." The world stopped. The air in the room seemed to crystallize. I watched, with a kind of slow-motion detachment, as every face froze. My father's jaw literally dropped, his proud, authoritative expression dissolving into slack-jawed disbelief. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. "Jonas, my spineless brother-in-law, went white as a sheet, looking as though he might be physically ill. And Winona. Oh, Winona. The color drained from her face. Her perfect, smug mask shattered, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. Founder of Orion Labs. The words hung in the air, a grenade that had just detonated in the center of their perfect, orderly world. As the last echo of Arthur's voice faded, leaving a silence so profound you could hear a pin drop, there was a new sound, the confident, rhythmic click of heels on the polished hardwood floor of the hallway. The study door swung open, and a woman I had been expecting stepped into the room. She was poised, professional, and wore a calm, controlled smile. It was Eliza Rowe, the highly respected head of human resources for the very company Winona was so desperate to partner with. She was supposed to have arrived later for a final meeting with Winona. I had, of course, arranged for her to arrive at this exact moment. She walked past my frozen family and came to a stop beside me, turning to face them. Her presence was a physical reinforcement of the truth, an objective validation they couldn't possibly deny. Eliza's gaze swept over their stunned faces before landing on Winona. "Winona," she said, her voice pleasant but firm, "I believe we were scheduled to discuss your firm's potential partnership with Orion Labs." She paused, letting the words hang in the air, before giving a small, knowing smile in my direction. "But it seems there's been a bit of a misunderstanding about who you should have been talking to." She then turned her address to the whole room, her voice ringing with an authority they couldn't question. "My company has been working directly with Dr. Clara Evason's company for the past 6 months. We bypassed the marketing department and went straight to the source, straight to the founder." She looked directly at Winona, her smile turning icy. "She owns the future of this technology, not you." Winona was the first to break the stunned silence. She let out a laugh, but it was a terrible sound, high-pitched and brittle, cracking with panic. That's ridiculous," she stammered, looking around the room for support that wasn't there. "Clara, she couldn't. This is some kind of joke. A sick, elaborate joke." But the words were hollow. No one was laughing with her. They were all staring at me. At the quiet, worthless daughter who was suddenly at the center of their universe. My mother, her face a pale mask of confusion and regret, finally found her voice. "Clara, how?" she whispered, the single word filled with a universe of questions. "How could this be real? How could we have been so wrong? How could you have done this without us?" I took a breath. The moment had come. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I simply laid out the facts, my tone as calm and clinical as if I were presenting a case study. "It started 2 years ago," I began, my gaze sweeping over their frozen faces. "After you kicked me out on Christmas Eve, I slept in my car that night. I saw my mother flinch. I had $4 to my name. I sent a desperate email to an old professor, a man named Dawson Flint. I looked at my father. He believed in me. He mentored me. We built a lab in an abandoned workshop. We lived off oatmeal and grant money. I let that sink in. We built a prototype. It was revolutionary. We secured our first licensing deal for $1.2 million. Jonas looked like he was about to faint. I turned my gaze to Winona, my voice dropping to an icy calm. "And then you stole it. You found my old notebooks, and you and Jonas tried to patent my work as your own. You laughed about it." Winona opened her mouth to protest, but no sound came out. "That was your biggest mistake," I continued. "You thought I was nothing, so I became nothing. I created Orion Labs as a ghost corporation. I built an international team, secured global patents, and raised millions in funding, all while you thought I was probably working as a barista." I paused, letting the full weight of their ignorance settle on them. "You didn't just underestimate me, you erased me. And in that empty space you created, I built an empire." The silence in the room was absolute. I had laid their arrogance, their cruelty, and their willful blindness bare. My father, who had built his life on control and authority, looked utterly broken. The world he understood had been turned upside down. He stared at me, his face a mess of fury and shame, and finally he spoke. His voice was a low, guttural snarl, his last pathetic attempt to reclaim power. "You are no daughter of mine, The words were meant to be the final, crushing blow, the ultimate rejection. 2 years ago, they would have destroyed me, but now, they were a gift. They were the final chain breaking. I looked him directly in the eye, my expression unyielding. "I accept your terms," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as ice, "and since I am no longer your daughter, you are no longer my family, which means my family and friends ethics clause no longer applies to you." I saw a flicker of confusion in his eyes. I leaned in, delivering the final, devastating blow. Orion Labs technology is now officially banned from being licensed or sold to your company, or any company you have a stake in this entire region. Don't spend a dime of my tech, Vance. It's off limits. The legacy he was so desperate to secure. I had just cut him off from it, forever. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for them. The perfectly constructed facade of the Evison family shattered into a million pieces. Jonas, my brother-in-law, was the first to crumble. Eliza Rowe later forwarded me his resignation email, which he had sent less than an hour after the confrontation. It was a short, pathetic message, citing personal reasons, but we both knew the truth. He was terrified. He had hitched his wagon to Winona, and in his desperation to curry favor, he had aided in stealing from a woman who was now, by any measure, one of the most powerful new figures in their industry. The professional shame, coupled with the sheer terror of what I could do to his career if I chose to press the matter legally, was enough to make him run. He quit his job. And I heard later through the grapevine that he and Winona were having problems. His cowardice had finally cost him everything. Eliza Rowe, on the other hand, was a rock. The neutral observer had become a powerful ally. The day after the disastrous family meeting, she called me. "I've spoken with my board," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "They were, to put it mildly, impressed with your strategic reveal. And even more impressed with your technology. We're formally terminating our exploratory talks with your sister's company, but we'd like to extend a different offer to you. We want to offer you a seat on our board of directors." A board seat. It was an incredible gesture of professional respect and validation, a formal acknowledgement of my power and expertise from a company I deeply admired. It was a future, offered up at the exact moment I had finally severed my past. That evening, I got one last call from Dawson. I was sitting in my quiet hotel room, the city lights of Boston spread out below me, and his gruff voice was a welcome sound. He had heard, of course. Eliza had called him. "You did it," he said simply. There was no fanfare, no effusive praise, just a statement of fact, filled with a deep, quiet pride. "On your terms. You didn't go back for their love. You went back for your power. I'm proud of you, Clara. 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 I'm proud of you, Clara." Coming from him, those words meant more than any multi-million-dollar deal. It was the final sign-off from the man who had seen a spark in the ashes and fanned it into a flame. Later that night, as I was preparing for my flight back to my real life, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number I didn't have saved, but I knew who it was from. My mother. The message was just 3 words. "We were wrong." I stared at the message on the cold, bright screen. 2 years ago, those words would have been a healing balm. I would have cried with relief, but now, they were nothing. Just a weak, pathetic attempt to stanch a wound that had long since scarred over. It was an apology offered not out of love, but out of a horrified realization of their own miscalculation. It was too little, too late. With a steady finger, I pressed and held the message, and without a moment's hesitation, I hit delete. I didn't reply. The door was closed. The conversation was over. The next morning, back in my Boston office, surrounded by my team, I signed a $50 million global distribution deal. My focus was on the future. The past had no more power over me. This time, the dinner was mine. I hosted it, not in a stuffy, oppressive dining room, but in a vibrant modern restaurant in downtown Boston, one with soaring windows and a joyful buzz of conversation. There was no polished walnut table of judgment. Instead, there were several round tables pushed together, encouraging laughter and conversation. The guests were not family bound by obligation, but a family I had chosen. My core team from Orion Labs was there, the brilliant minds who had helped me build everything. Eliza Rowe was there, now a friend as well as a board colleague. A few other startup founders I'd befriended were there, people who understood the struggle and the triumph, and in the seat of honor, looking slightly out of place in a collared shirt, but with a genuine smile on his face, was Dawson. He'd driven down from his cabin for the occasion. The air was filled not with perfume and judgment, but with the delicious smell of good food and the sound of genuine, happy laughter. Toward the end of the meal, I stood up, tapping my glass with a fork. A hush fell over our corner of the restaurant. All eyes turned to me. And for the first time in a room full of people, I felt no anxiety, only a deep sense of gratitude. I'm not much for formal speeches, I began, my voice clear and warm, but I wanted to thank all of you for being here, for being a part of this. I raised my glass. Someone once told me that success is the best revenge. And for a while, I think that's what drove me. So here's to that. I guess revenge tastes better than turkey. A wave of knowing laughter went around the tables. They all knew bits and pieces of my story, enough to understand the reference. They laughed with me, a supportive shared moment of victory. But as the laughter subsided, I looked around at their smiling faces, at the people who had believed in me, challenged me, and celebrated with me, and I knew that wasn't the whole truth anymore. That wasn't the final lesson. Actually, I corrected myself, my voice softer now, more reflective. I was wrong. Revenge is what gets you started. It's the fuel for the fire when you're cold, but it's not the goal. I paused, meeting Dawson's eye across the room. He gave me a slight approving nod. Respect, I said, the word feeling clean and true in my mouth. Respect tastes better. The respect of people you respect. The respect you earn for yourself. That's the real feast. I raised my glass higher. So to respect, to building things that matter, and to the family we choose. The chorus of hear, hear, and the clinking of glasses was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of belonging. A few weeks later, I found myself back where it all began. I had driven to the old abandoned workshop. The new owner had let me in for one last look before it was due to be torn down. The air was still thick with the ghosts of memory, the faint scent of sawdust, old oil, and my own desperation. I ran my hand over the dusty workbench, where I had cried into cups of cold, bitter coffee, where Dawson had pushed me, and where I had danced alone in the dark. It felt like a lifetime ago. I remembered the girl who had worked here, so full of doubt, so desperate for approval, so broken. I felt a surge of tenderness for her resilience. She had no idea what she was capable of. She just knew she couldn't give up. Later that day, I sat in a sleek podcast studio, a pair of heavy headphones over my ears. I was now a person whose story others wanted to hear. The interviewer was a kind, intelligent woman who had done her research. We talked about biotech, about innovation, about the challenges of being a female founder, and then she asked the question I knew was coming. Your story is incredible, Dr. Eva. You've spoken about the difficulties in your past. If you could say anything to your family now, what would it be? I paused, considering the question. The old Clara would have had a list of grievances, a torrent of angry, hurt words, but I wasn't her anymore. I thought about them, my father with his broken pride, my mother with her late-game regret, Winona with her shattered arrogance. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hatred. I felt a strange, quiet sense of peace, a profound and final detachment. I'm not mad, I said, the words coming out soft but sure, a truth I had only recently discovered myself. The interviewer looked surprised. I'm not, I reaffirmed. In a way, I'm grateful. They gave me the one thing I never could have found on my own. I smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached my eyes. They gave me the reason to build something so big, so powerful, and so undeniably real that they couldn't ignore it. Their rejection was the friction I needed to start the fire. I don't owe them my anger anymore. The interview ended. I walked out of the studio and into the crisp winter air. It had just started to snow. the flakes fat and white, swirling in the halos of the streetlights. It was the same kind of snow that had fallen the night I was cast out, the night I had stood shaking and alone on my parents' porch. But this time, everything was different. I pulled the collar of my warm, expensive coat tighter around my neck. I wasn't shivering, I wasn't hungry, and I wasn't alone. I walked down the street, my steps light and sure on the dusting of white. I was warm, I was full, and for the first time in my entire life, I was completely and utterly free. When they push you out, don't beg to be let back in. Build the door they can't open. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family? What would your revenge arc look like? Let me know in the comments. I read every one. If Clara's journey inspired you, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. This is just the beginning. Keep rising, keep building. Your comeback is next.